Now, we are looking at 4 problems with philosophical theology. If you were to look at the work of philosophical theology in general, you will discover, among other things, these 4 problems that make the subject of my discussion this day. Problem number 1. Philosophical theology does not take into account theology's position, or in particular, the Trinitarian theologian's position, resulting in philosophy speaking to itself. Listen to many videos on theological or philosophical theology, or look at many works done on the subject. You will notice that there is a lot of philosophy, but very little theology. That makes you wonder why it's called philosophical theology at all. Because what we have at the end of the day is philosophy speaking to itself. It's laying down rules for theology and not taking into account what theology considers, or not taking into account theology's position. So that is one problem with a philosophical theology. What is the other problem with philosophical theology? It is this: it does not consider God as a living entity. It does not consider God as a thinking entity. It does not consider God as a communicating entity. And therein is the fallacy of theological philosophy. It does not consider the existence of God. It does not appreciate the fact that God thinks. And lastly, it does not celebrate the fact that God has communicated. And that's why at the end of the day, doesn't matter how hard you try to understand philosophical theology, you will not come to a point where it brings out the true definition, the true explanation of who God is. Another problem, a third problem with philosophical theology, is that it is an academic in its approach. It does not follow academic protocols. What do I mean? Here's what I mean. As a study, there is a sense, there is a degree to which philosophical theology is supposed to approach its topics, at least, for example, the study of God, without presuppositions. Yet, you look at most works, they approach the study of God with certain presuppositions, and that does not constitute a study. That is an academic. If a biologist wanted to study an alligator, they don't approach the alligator with some presuppositions that the alligator needs to be maybe this long. The alligator needs to be this heavy. they approach the alligator with say an open mind. The alligator can be whatever length it is, it can weigh whatever weight. So they go with a measurement that's able to measure. But if they were to approach the alligator with presuppositions, with some preconceived ideas, as we say, then what's going to happen is, when it gets the alligator, if say it wanted to find the alligator to be, say, 3 feet long, that is presupposition. So what happens, and when it finds that the alligator is actually 3.5 feet long, so perhaps it will have to cut the tail of the alligator to fit with its presupposition. And what will have happened is that the biology will have maimed the alligator because of the presupposition. And that is what happening in philosophical theology. There is a lot of maiming resulting from presupposition. There is a lot of maiming of who God is, and metaphysics and those kind of things, because of presupposition. Academic approach is a study. If you study the alligator, you approach it with, it can weigh anything, whether it's 2 kilos, it can be 20 kilos, tons. You weigh. That's a study. You weigh and leave it as far as possible in its natural environment, but not, move it from its natural maybe habitat and trying to affect it in some way, so that at the end of the day you don't have an alligator. So that is not academic. That's not proper. That's not that's what philosophical theology does in treating the metaphysics. The other problem, the fourth problem, it does not recognize that theology is a philosophy and therefore does not need philosophy. This is much like a sperm trying to fertilize another sperm. At some point or other, philosophical theology will need to come to terms with the fact that theology is a philosophy in and of itself. What we see in a lot of the works going around is that philosophical theology does not appreciate, does not accept the fact that theology is a philosophy of itself. And the result is, I think, the pseudo-philosophy. It's not, philosophical theology becomes a pseudo-philosophy because it's trying to stretch theology out of its limits, and trying to reshape or re-explain or redefine theology. Here is my conclusion. Theology at some point deals with metaphysics. And the sooner philosophical theology comes to terms with the fact that in order to understand theology, theological terms need to be taken into account at face value as what they mean. It's like trying to transact something. It's like, because in other words, metaphysical transactions need to be done in metaphysical currency. That is all I'm saying. Metaphysical transactions need to be done in metaphysical currency. Theologians, left to themselves, are able to explain the existence of God and what man, needs to do, how man needs to relate with God without the interference of philosophy as we know it. Why? Because theology is a philosophy of itself. Those, to me, are the four problems with philosophical theology.